racist millionaire mocks an elderly black gardener while hosting a party, not knowing he's a war hero. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the sprawling estate of Douglas Grant. The sprawling gardens, meticulously tended by Samuel Wright, were a riot of colors as autumn leaves twirled down from the trees like confetti. Samuel had spent the last few weeks preparing for this party, knowing his work would be on display for the elite of the city, yet as he stood amidst the vibrant blooms, he felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Laughter floated through the air from the mansion, mingling with the earthy scent of the freshly turned soil. Samuel wiped his brow, his calloused hands resting on the garden spade. For over 20 years, he had cared for these gardens, transforming them into a sanctuary of beauty. Here, amid the flowers and fragrant herbs, he found solace from the world, a world that often felt harsh and unforgiving. As dusk settled, the guests began to arrive, each one more ostentatious than the last. Samuel watched from the edge of the garden, his heart heavy. Douglas, the millionaire who owned the estate, was known for his lavish parties and even more lavish insults. Samuel had heard the stories, the way Douglas belittled his staff, the crude jokes, the casual racism that rolled off his tongue like a well-rehearsed monologue. It was as if Douglas took pleasure in reminding those beneath him of their place. Samuel, Douglas's booming voice sliced through the evening air, calling him over. Samuel hesitated, knowing all too well what was coming. With a deep breath, he stepped into the light spilling from the mansion's grand entrance. "Ah, our gardener, the man of the hour," Douglas sneered, his eyes sparkling with malice. His guests gathered around, drinks in hand, eager for entertainment. "Look at him. The only thing grayer than those weeds is his hair." Laughter erupted from the crowd, a cruel and mocking sound that made Samuel's blood boil. Samuel clenched his fists at his sides, the memories of younger days in the jungle flashing through his mind. He had fought for his country, earned medals for bravery, and yet here he was, reduced to a punchline. He swallowed hard, fighting back the urge to retaliate. Was this how he wanted to spend the evening? "Samuel, come on now," Douglas continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "You should be proud. You've cultivated this garden to match let's say your level of expertise." He gestured dramatically, and the guests erupted in laughter again. With every laugh, Samuel felt a part of himself wither away. Did they not see the beauty he had created? Each flower, each carefully arranged shrub, held a story of resilience, of survival. But all they saw was a black man in an apron, toiling in the dirt. "Don't be shy, Sam," one of the guests chimed in, a blonde woman with a glass of champagne, her perfectly manicured nails glinting in the light. "Tell us how you keep these plants alive. Do you sing to them?" "More like he talks down to them," Douglas quipped, his eyes glinting with mischief. Samuel's heart thudded in his chest, a mixture of rage and helplessness flooding through him. He had spent years cultivating not just plants, but a sense of pride in his work. "I take care of them with love," Samuel finally said, his voice steady despite the growing anger within him. "They respond to kindness." Douglas snorted, leaning back against the railing of the porch, a smirk plastered on his face. "Kindness? That's rich coming from you. I bet you've never seen a plant you didn't think needed some loving care. But let's be honest, Sam, you're just a gardener. What do you know about elegance?" The laughter exploded again, ringing in Samuel's ears. He felt the heat of humiliation wash over him, a tide of memories rushing back. Of his youth, of the jungle, of the brothers in arms who had fought and died beside him, many of whom had been black men like him. They had faced the enemy together, endured hardship together, and yet here he was, standing on the sidelines, while Douglas mocked him like he was nothing. "Douglas," Samuel said, his voice stronger now, "the only thing lacking elegance is your character." He took a small step forward, the weight of his words hanging in the air. For a moment, silence fell. The laughter ceased, replaced by a stunned hush. Douglas's face twisted in disbelief, the smirk faltering. "What did you say?" he asked, incredulous. "I said," Samuel repeated, "that your character lacks elegance." The other guests shifted uncomfortably, their curiosity piqued. Samuel could feel the tension crackling in the air, a palpable shift that made him take a breath. Perhaps he had gone too far, but the fire in him was unquenchable. He had spent too long being silent, too long letting others define him. "Who do you think you are?" Douglas spat, his tone venomous. "You think just because you worked in my garden, you can talk to me like that? You're lucky to be here at all." Samuel's heart raced, but he stood his ground. The memories of his military brothers surged forth, the camaraderie and the honor they had fought for. They would never bow to a bully, and neither would he. "I am a man who fought for this country," he declared, his voice rising above the noise. "I earned my place here." Another tense silence enveloped the group, and Samuel saw the flicker of surprise in the guests' eyes. They were beginning to see him, not just as a gardener, but as a man with a past, a man with dignity. "Fought for what?" Douglas scoffed, trying to regain control. "You're just a gardener who has no idea how the world works. You think you can earn respect with a shovel and some dirt?" Samuel's pulse quickened. "Respect is earned through action, Douglas, not wealth. You may have money, but that doesn't make you a better man." The crowd was now hanging on his every word, the energy shifting in his favor. But just then, a loud crash came from inside the mansion, echoing through the air like a gunshot. The guests turned in unison, startled by the sudden interruption. Samuel seized the moment, his heart pounding with the realization that this could be his chance to reclaim his dignity. He stepped closer, the warmth of the garden embracing him, and as he did, he felt the weight of the years of silence fall away. The laughter and jeers faded into the background, replaced by the resolve that had carried him through battles long past. "Douglas," Samuel said, his voice low and steady, "you may think you control this party and everyone in it, but you don't control me. You don't define my worth." The guests watched, captivated, as Samuel's words hung in the air, a challenge thrown down. Douglas's face contorted with rage, his bravado slipping away as the tide turned against him. "Get back to your garden, old man," Douglas spat, but there was less confidence now, more desperation. Samuel took a deep breath, ready to confront the man who had belittled him for far too long. The moment had come, and he was determined to seize it. Samuel stood tall, feeling the weight of years behind him. It wasn't just the garden he had cultivated over time. It was his spirit, forged in the fires of conflict and hardship. He had tended to the landscape of his life with care, much like the flowers around him, and he wasn't about to let Douglas Grant trample over it with his arrogance. "Why don't you tell everyone here about your service?" a voice called from the crowd. Samuel turned to see a young woman with curly hair and bright eyes, leaning forward, her expression curious and encouraging. It was a spark of support from an unexpected source, and it fueled Samuel's determination. "Yes," another guest chimed in, a middle-aged man with a neatly trimmed beard. "We'd like to hear your story, Samuel." Douglas's face reddened, and he shifted uncomfortably, clearly rattled by the change in the atmosphere. "This is ridiculous," he barked. But Samuel could see the tide had turned. The guests were no longer laughing at him, they were beginning to listen. "Please," Samuel said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I fought in Vietnam. I was proud to serve my country, to stand shoulder to shoulder with men who believed in something greater than themselves." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. "But it was hard. We faced not just the enemy, but the prejudice that came with it. I lost friends out there, brave men just like me. We fought for freedom, not just for ourselves, but for everyone." The crowd was silent now, the laughter replaced by an earnest curiosity. Samuel could see their faces softening, their expressions shifting from condescension to respect. Even Douglas, despite his bluster, was struggling to maintain his facade of superiority. "Being a gardener is not a lesser job," Samuel continued, his voice rising with conviction. "It's a calling. It requires patience, skill, and a deep understanding of life itself. Just as we fought for our freedom, I cultivate this garden because it brings life and beauty to the world." He gestured around him, the flowers swaying gently in the evening breeze. "These plants have stories, just like me. They grow despite the odds, and they thrive with care. That's something you wouldn't understand, Douglas." With each word, Samuel felt a surge of strength. It was as if the garden had embraced him, wrapping him in its warmth and resilience. He glanced at Douglas, whose expression had shifted from anger to something resembling fear. The other guests were no longer entranced by Douglas's wealth. They had shifted their focus to the man standing before them, the man who had earned every inch of respect he was beginning to claim. "Let me share a memory with you," Samuel said, and he felt the crowd lean in closer, eager to hear more. There was a moment in Vietnam when my unit was ambushed. We were outnumbered, and it felt like the end was near. My best friend was hit, and I had to make a choice: leave him behind or risk my life to save him. I chose to go back for him. I dragged him out of the line of fire, and we both survived. That's what courage is. It's not defined by the money you have or the position you hold. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice for others. As he spoke, Samuel noticed some guests nodding, their eyes glistening with understanding. He felt the power of his story ripple through the crowd, breaking down barriers and misconceptions. It was a moment of connection, a shared humanity that transcended race and class. "Samuel," Douglas interjected, his voice strained, "you're trying to make this about something it's not. This is my party. You're just a gardener. People are here to have fun, not to listen to your sob stories." The crowd gasped, and Samuel felt a wave of anger surge within him. "You think this is a sob story? This is my life, Douglas. It's filled with struggle, yes, but also with pride. You mock me for my work, but I've built something meaningful. I've poured love and effort into this garden, just as I poured my heart into serving my country." "Love?" Douglas scoffed, attempting to regain his composure. "You think love can pay the bills? You think love will get you respect?" "I don't need your respect," Samuel retorted, his voice rising with intensity. "Respect isn't given, it's earned. And I've earned it through my actions, not my bank account. You may have wealth, but it doesn't make you a man." The tension in the air was palpable. Guests exchanged glances, murmurs rippling through the crowd. Samuel could see the shift. They were no longer swayed by Douglas's bravado. They were beginning to recognize the truth in Samuel's words. "Douglas," a woman finally spoke, her voice brave but shaky, "you've always treated Samuel like he's beneath you. This is unacceptable. We came here for a celebration, not to watch you belittle someone who deserves our respect." Douglas's face twisted in anger, but the crowd was no longer behind him. Samuel felt a rush of exhilaration, the kind he hadn't felt in years. He was standing up, not just for himself, but for every person who had ever been marginalized or belittled. "Let's not forget," another guest chimed in, their tone firm, "that we're all here because of Samuel's hard work. This garden is stunning, and it reflects his dedication. It's a shame you can't see that." Douglas's bravado was fading fast, and Samuel could see the realization dawning on him. This was a different kind of battle, one fought not with weapons, but with truth and dignity. "Enough!" Douglas shouted, his voice cracking. "I won't be embarrassed in my own home." Samuel took a step closer, his heart racing. "You've embarrassed yourself, Douglas, not me. All I wanted was to share my story, to show that there's more to life than money and status. The true measure of a man is how he treats others, especially those he perceives as beneath him." The guests were now firmly on Samuel's side, their support evident in their nods and murmurs of agreement. Douglas was losing control, the veneer of invincibility slipping away as Samuel's words resonated with the crowd. "Maybe it's time to rethink how you see the world," Samuel continued, his voice steady. "Perhaps you should take a lesson from this garden. It thrives on diversity. It needs different elements to flourish, just like our society. We all have a role to play, and every role matters." With that, Samuel felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had spoken his truth. He had stood up for himself and for those who had come before him. The guests began to applaud, slowly at first, but then with growing fervor, their support echoing through the garden. Douglas's face twisted in rage, but now it was clear he was outnumbered. The laughter and cheers from the crowd were a stark contrast to the silence that had previously filled the air. "Get out," Douglas finally spat, his voice laced with venom. "Get out of my house." Samuel took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I will leave, Douglas, but not because you told me to. I will leave because I no longer need to prove myself to you or anyone else. You don't define my worth." He turned, walking away from the gathering, the applause still ringing in his ears. As he stepped into the garden, the cool evening air enveloped him, and he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had confronted the man who had belittled him for far too long, and he had emerged victorious, not just for himself, but for every voice that had been silenced. Samuel smiled softly to himself, knowing he had reclaimed his dignity. The garden, with its vibrant colors and fragrant blooms, stood as a testament to resilience. And as he walked away from the party, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, ready to nurture not just the land, but also the spirit of those who dared to rise against injustice. As Samuel Wright stepped away from the chaos of Douglas Grant's party, the applause still echoed in his ears, a melody of affirmation that warmed his heart. He had always been more comfortable in the garden than in the spotlight, yet tonight felt different. He had stood up for himself, for everyone who had been belittled and disrespected, and it felt empowering. The cool evening air brushed against his skin, invigorating him as he walked through the lush garden he had tended for years. Each flower, each meticulously trimmed hedge, whispered stories of resilience and growth. Samuel paused by a bed of vibrant marigolds, their golden petals glowing in the dim light, and took a deep breath, inhaling their earthy fragrance. The garden had always been a sanctuary, a place where he found peace amid turmoil. But tonight was not over, and Samuel knew he couldn't let the moment pass without addressing the deeper issues at play. He could hear the muffled sounds of laughter and chatter drifting from the mansion, but it was no longer directed at him. Instead, the guests were likely discussing the confrontation, their opinions shifting like the wind through the trees. As he moved toward the back entrance of the mansion, he noticed a few guests lingering around the edge of the garden, their expressions a mix of curiosity and apprehension. A couple of them had supported him during the confrontation, but he could see others still tethered to Douglas's influence, their loyalty wavering like leaves in the breeze. "Samuel," called the young woman with curly hair, the one who had encouraged him to share his story. Her name was Lisa, he remembered. "Are you okay?" Samuel turned, offering her a warm smile. "I'm fine, Lisa. Just needed a moment to breathe." "I can't believe how you handled that," she said, admiration shining in her eyes. "You were incredible out there." "Thank you," he replied, warmth spreading through him at her words. It wasn't easy, but someone had to say it. Others began to gather around, drawn to the strength of his words and the courage he had shown. Samuel welcomed their presence, feeling the support of those who understood the weight of his experiences. "Do you really think he'll change?" asked a man named Harold, a journalist with a reputation for covering social issues. "Douglas has always been a bully. I'm not sure he'll take this lightly." Samuel considered the question, looking beyond the manicured lawns and into the distance where the sun had finally dipped below the horizon, leaving a cool twilight in its wake. "Change is a slow process," he said, "but sometimes it starts with a moment of truth. If enough people challenge his behavior, maybe he'll begin to see that his way isn't the only way." Harold nodded, deep in thought. "You might be right. I'm going to write about this. People need to know how he treats others, especially people like you who have given so much." "Be careful, though," Samuel warned. "He has a way of retaliating if he feels threatened, but your voice can make a difference. Use it wisely." Lisa stepped closer, her expression serious. "What you said about respect, it really resonated with everyone. You've opened our eyes, Samuel. We can't let this moment die down." Samuel felt a swell of gratitude toward her. "Thank you, Lisa. But it's not just about me. It's about all of us recognizing our worth. We need to stand together against people like Douglas." The gathering of guests continued to grow, each one sharing their thoughts on what had transpired. Samuel felt a sense of camaraderie building among them, a shared understanding that they were all part of something bigger. They had the power to challenge the status quo and support one another. Suddenly, the door to the mansion swung open, and Douglas emerged, flanked by a couple of his more loyal guests. His face was a mask of anger, eyes darting around the garden as if searching for someone to blame. The laughter and chatter inside had died down, replaced by a tense silence that hung in the air. "Get back inside," Douglas barked, his voice sharp and commanding. "This party is over." Samuel stood his ground, his heart pounding but resolute. "Not yet, Douglas. I think everyone deserves to hear what you really think of them." Douglas's face flushed, the anger radiating off him like heat from a furnace. "You think you can just waltz in here and ruin my evening? You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Maybe it's you who has no idea," Samuel shot back, feeling the energy of the crowd behind him. "You think your wealth and status can shield you from accountability? Your behavior affects everyone here, and we won't let you silence us." The guests shifted uneasily, but remained by Samuel's side, their loyalty evident. Douglas's bravado began to crumble, and Samuel could see the realization dawning on him that he was losing control of the narrative. "Listen," Douglas started, his voice softer now, but still laced with anger. "I don't need a lesson in respect from someone like you. You're just a gardener." Samuel took a step forward, unwavering. "And you're a man who thinks money can buy respect. But let me tell you something. Respect is earned through your actions, not your bank account. You may have built this estate, but your character is what truly defines you." Several guests murmured in agreement, emboldened by Samuel's words. Douglas's face twisted in rage, but he could no longer ignore the growing tide of dissent among his guests. They were no longer interested in his wealth. They were interested in the truth. "Enough of this!" Douglas shouted, his voice echoing in the garden. "You're all being ridiculous. I won't stand here and be publicly humiliated by a man who knows nothing of my world." "Your world," Lisa interjected, stepping forward. "Your world is built on the backs of people like Samuel. You might have the money, but you lack integrity. You're the one who knows nothing about the struggles others face." Douglas's expression twisted in disbelief, and Samuel felt a surge of hope. This was the moment they all needed, to challenge the narrative, to expose the truth hidden behind the facade of wealth and privilege. "You think you can come into my home and turn my guests against me?" Douglas spat, his voice dripping with venom. "I'll make sure you all regret this." "Regret what?" Samuel replied, his voice calm but firm. "For standing up for what's right, for calling out a bully? You can't intimidate us anymore. We've seen you for who you really are." The crowd began to rally behind Samuel, their voices rising in unity. The support was palpable, and Samuel felt invigorated by their presence. They were no longer passive observers. They were active participants in a movement that had been long overdue. "Douglas, this isn't just about you anymore," Lisa said, her voice steady. "It's about every person you've ever belittled, every soul you've tried to crush under your weight. We won't stand for it any longer." Douglas's face contorted in rage, but he could see he was losing ground. The guests were no longer afraid of him. They were emboldened by Samuel's bravery and the shared conviction that had blossomed in the garden. "Get out of my house!" Douglas shouted, desperation creeping into his tone. "I won't have you ruining my reputation." Samuel felt a sense of calm wash over him. "We won't be silenced, Douglas. You can try to kick us out, but our voices will only grow stronger. You can't erase the truth with threats." He turned to the crowd, who nodded in agreement, their expressions resolute. They were ready to stand together against the man who had tried to diminish their worth. "Let's go," Lisa said, her voice rising above the tension. "We'll find another place to celebrate, one where everyone is valued." The guests began to move toward the exit, their decision clear. Samuel felt a surge of pride as he watched them stand together, united against the injustice they had witnessed. They would not allow Douglas to dictate their worth any longer. As they left the garden, Samuel took one last look at the mansion, the scene of so much pain and prejudice. But now there was hope. The garden stood behind him, a reminder of resilience in the beauty that could flourish even in adversity. As Samuel and the group moved away from Douglas's mansion, a sense of exhilaration surged through him. The air was charged with energy, the kind that follows a storm. And although they had left the party behind, Samuel could still hear echoes of laughter and the clinking of glasses from within. But it was a hollow sound now, devoid of meaning, and he felt a weight lift off his shoulders with every step he took. The guests gathered in a nearby park, a serene contrast to the chaos they had just left behind. The trees swayed gently in the evening breeze, their leaves whispering secrets of resilience. Samuel took a deep breath, inhaling the fresh air and feeling the tension of the evening begin to dissipate. "Where to now?" Lisa asked, breaking the silence that had settled over the group. Her eyes sparkled with determination as she looked around at the others. "How about we find a place to grab some food?" Harold suggested. "I think we could all use a little comfort after that." "Sounds good to me," Samuel replied, grateful for the distraction. "Let's find a diner or something nearby. I could use a cup of coffee and a slice of pie." As they started walking toward the nearest street, the group began to chatter, excitement bubbling over as they recounted the events of the evening. Samuel listened, feeling a swell of pride for the courage they had all shown. They were no longer passive participants. They had become advocates for change, standing together against injustice. "I never thought I'd see the day someone stood up to Douglas like that," one guest remarked, shaking his head in disbelief. "You were incredible, Samuel." "Absolutely," another chimed in. You called him out in front of everyone. It was bold, and it needed to happen. Samuel felt a warmth spread through him at their words. Thank you. But it wasn't just me. It was all of you who rallied behind the truth. That made all the difference. As they approached a small diner, the neon sign flickered to life, casting a soft glow on the pavement. The familiar scent of fries and burgers wafted through the air, inviting them inside. Samuel stepped in first, followed by the rest of the group. The atmosphere was casual and welcoming, a stark contrast to the opulence of Douglas's mansion. They settled into a large booth, laughter and chatter filling the space as they ordered their food. Samuel could hear the clinking of dishes and the hum of conversation around him, a comforting symphony that reminded him of simpler times. I have to say, Harold began, leaning back in his seat, I'm going to write an article about everything that happened tonight. It's time people know what kind of person Douglas really is. That's a great idea, Lisa replied, her enthusiasm infectious. It might even spark conversations about how we treat one another in general. I just hope Douglas doesn't retaliate, another guest said, his expression serious. He has a reputation for being vindictive, especially when his ego is bruised. Samuel nodded, understanding the concern. He may try to retaliate, but we can't let fear stop us from speaking out. The truth is powerful. If enough people stand together, it's hard for someone like him to silence us. Their food arrived, plates piled high with comfort food that made Samuel's mouth water. He took a moment to savor the moment, the warmth of camaraderie enveloping him like a favorite blanket. They began to eat, sharing stories and laughs, and it felt as if the tension from earlier had melted away. Samuel, what you did tonight was more than just standing up to Douglas, Lisa said, her eyes sparkling with admiration. You inspired all of us to find our voices. It's about time we recognize our worth. Exactly, Harold agreed. We can't let people like him dictate how we feel about ourselves. We deserve to be treated with respect, regardless of our jobs or backgrounds. Samuel felt a rush of gratitude for their words. I appreciate that, but it's important for us to keep the conversation going. We can't just let this moment pass. We need to challenge the status quo and support one another. As they ate, the conversations flowed freely, filled with laughter and stories of shared experiences. Samuel felt a renewed sense of purpose, a feeling that they could all affect change together, and while he knew the road ahead would be challenging, he was no longer afraid to take the first steps. After finishing their meals, they lingered over coffee, the warmth of the drink comforting. How do we keep this momentum going? One of the guests asked, leaning forward, eager to find a solution. Maybe we can organize a community meeting, Lisa suggested, a place where people can come together to share their stories and experiences. We can discuss issues of respect, dignity, and support. I love that idea, Samuel said, feeling a spark of excitement. It's essential that we create a safe space for dialogue. We need to empower one another to speak out against injustice. As the discussion continued, they brainstormed ideas for the meeting, their enthusiasm palpable. Samuel felt a sense of belonging, a connection that had been missing for far too long. The diner, with its retro decor and familiar atmosphere, became a haven for their aspirations. But as the night wore on, Samuel's thoughts drifted back to Douglas. The confrontation had been cathartic, but there was still a lingering unease. Would Douglas retaliate? Would he try to undermine the progress they were making? Samuel knew he couldn't let these thoughts consume him. He had to stay focused on the mission ahead. As they prepared to leave the diner, Samuel felt a sense of camaraderie that he hadn't experienced in years. The guests had become allies, united in a cause greater than themselves. Together, they could challenge the narratives that had held them back. Let's meet again soon, Samuel said as they stepped outside, the cool night air refreshing against their skin. We'll plan the community meeting and start spreading the word. Absolutely, Lisa replied, her excitement contagious. I'll post about it on social media and encourage others to join us. As they parted ways, Samuel felt a renewed sense of hope. The garden had always been his refuge, a place where he found peace and purpose. But now he had found a community, a group of like-minded individuals ready to stand up for what was right. Walking home, he reflected on the evening, a smile creeping onto his face. He had faced down a bully and inspired others to find their voices. The journey ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to embrace it. The world needed more people willing to stand up against injustice, and he was determined to be one of them. In the days that followed, Samuel and the group worked tirelessly to organize the community meeting. They reached out to local organizations, spread the word on social media, and prepared to share their stories. Samuel felt a sense of purpose as he watched the momentum build, knowing they were creating something meaningful. The night of the meeting arrived, and Samuel stood at the front of the community center, his heart racing with anticipation. This was the moment he had been waiting for, a chance to connect with others, to share experiences, and to foster a sense of unity. As people filtered into the room, Samuel felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. They were all there for the same reason, to stand together against prejudice and injustice. The air buzzed with energy, and he knew that together they could make a difference. The community center buzzed with energy as Samuel Wright stood at the front of the room, looking out over a sea of faces. Chairs had been arranged in a large circle, and the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. The walls were adorned with local artwork, a celebration of culture and resilience that mirrored the spirit of the gathering. Samuel felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as he prepared to address the crowd. He had spent the past week working alongside Lisa, Harold, and the other guests from Douglas's party to organize this meeting. They had reached out to friends, neighbors, and local organizations, urging them to come together to discuss issues of respect, dignity, and the importance of standing up against prejudice. As he looked around the room, Samuel felt a sense of pride. They had done it, brought people together who were ready to share their stories and advocate for change. "Welcome, everyone," Samuel began, his voice steady as he spoke into the microphone. "Thank you all for being here tonight. This gathering is a testament to our shared commitment to challenge injustice and support one another." He scanned the room, noticing familiar faces from the diner, as well as new ones filled with curiosity and determination. "We're here to create a space where everyone's voice matters, where we can share our experiences and learn from one another. We've all faced challenges, whether due to race, class, or our backgrounds, and it's time we come together to address these issues head-on." A round of applause erupted, and Samuel felt a surge of encouragement. He continued, "I want to start by sharing my own story. Many of you know that I served in Vietnam, and while it was a time of great pride for me, it was also filled with hardship. I fought alongside brave men who looked like me, who faced not only the enemy but also the prejudice that lingered back home." As Samuel spoke, he felt the weight of his past lift slightly, the act of sharing becoming cathartic. "When I returned from the war, I faced challenges that no one prepared me for. I was a veteran, yet I found myself struggling to find work, to be seen as more than just a black man with a shovel. But I poured my heart into the gardens I tended, finding beauty and solace in the plants that thrived against the odds." The room was silent, the audience captivated by his words. "I've learned that resilience is not just about surviving. It's about thriving. It's about nurturing the roots of our community and supporting one another. That's why we're here tonight, to plant the seeds for change." Samuel paused, letting his words resonate. "I invite anyone who wants to share their story to do so. This is a safe space, and we're all here to listen and learn from one another." One by one, people began to speak, sharing their experiences of prejudice, discrimination, and the battles they had fought. A young woman named Aisha stood up, her voice trembling but strong. "I faced discrimination at my job because of my hijab. I was told I didn't fit the company's image and it hurt. But I fought back. I spoke up and I brought my case to HR. It's not easy, but we have to advocate for ourselves." The room erupted in applause, and Samuel felt a swell of admiration for her courage. Another guest, an older man named Mr. Thompson, shared his experience growing up in a segregated neighborhood. "I remember the days when we weren't allowed in certain stores, when the color of my skin dictated where I could go. It's been a long fight for equality, and while we've made progress, there's still so much work to do." As the stories flowed, Samuel felt a sense of unity building among the group. They were no longer strangers. They were allies, connected through shared struggles and aspirations. The air was thick with emotion, each story a thread weaving them together into a tapestry of resilience. Just as the conversation began to deepen, the door swung open, and in walked Douglas Grant. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Samuel's heart raced as he recognized the familiar face, a mix of anger and determination surging through him. "Good evening, everyone," Douglas said, his voice dripping with disdain. I see you've gathered a little support group here. How quaint. The laughter and chatter faded, replaced by a tense silence. Samuel felt the weight of the room shift, a palpable tension hanging in the air. He stepped forward, anger coursing through him. What are you doing here, Douglas? This is a safe space for people to share their experiences. Safe space? Douglas scoffed, his voice mocking. You think that you can just gather and talk about me behind my back? I won't stand for it. Maybe it's time you listened, Samuel shot back, his voice firm. You can't keep silencing people just because you're uncomfortable with the truth. Douglas's eyes narrowed, and he stepped closer, the hostility radiating off him. You don't get to dictate how I run my life, Samuel. You're a gardener, not a leader. You think you can challenge me? Samuel took a deep breath, grounding himself in the moment. This isn't just about you and me, Douglas. This is about everyone in this room who has faced discrimination and prejudice. You've used your wealth and power to belittle others for too long. It's time for that to change. The guests shifted, murmurs of support rippling through the crowd. Douglas's bravado seemed to falter as he realized he was surrounded by people who were no longer afraid of him. Why don't you tell everyone here how you really feel about us? A woman in the back called out, her voice steady. Let's see if you have the guts to say it to our faces. Douglas hesitated, the confident facade beginning to crack. You think you can intimidate me? I have resources, connections. You're nothing but a bully, Samuel interrupted, his voice rising. And bullies only thrive when they're allowed to intimidate others. We're not going to let you do that anymore. The tension in the room reached a boiling point. Douglas's expression shifted from arrogance to desperation, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. He could feel the shift in the crowd. Their loyalty was no longer his. Get out of here, another guest voiced, their tone unwavering. You're not welcome. Douglas stood frozen, the reality of the situation crashing down on him. The power he once wielded seemed to evaporate, leaving behind a vulnerable man exposed to the truth. You'll regret this, he finally spat, but the threat lacked conviction. Regret what? Samuel challenged, stepping closer. For standing up for ourselves, for demanding respect. We've taken back our voices, and you can't silence us any longer. With that, the crowd erupted in applause, a chorus of support for Samuel and the courage they had all shown. Douglas's face twisted in rage, but he knew he was outnumbered, his power stripped away. You think this is over? Douglas shouted as he turned to leave, his voice trailing off, a desperate attempt to reclaim some semblance of control. You'll regret this, I promise you. Samuel watched as Douglas stormed out, the door slamming behind him. The tension in the room dissipated, replaced by a sense of triumph and unity. The crowd erupted in cheers, celebrating the collective courage they had displayed. Thank you, Samuel, Aisha said, her eyes shining with admiration. You stood up to him. You showed us that we can't be afraid to speak out. Let's keep this momentum going, Harold urged, raising his voice above the cheers. We're not just here for tonight, we're here to make a difference. We need to organize, to advocate for change in our community. Samuel felt the energy pulse through the room, a wave of determination washing over him. This was just the beginning. They had taken a significant step forward, but the journey was far from over. I agree, Samuel said, stepping back to the front. We can't stop here. We need to work together to bring about real change. Let's plan our next steps, put our voices together, and ensure that our message is heard. As the group gathered around to discuss their plans, Samuel felt a sense of hope blossoming within him. They had faced the storm, and together, they had emerged stronger. This was a community united in purpose, ready to challenge the injustices that had long persisted. In the days that followed, Samuel and the group worked tirelessly, organizing rallies, reaching out to local organizations, and spreading their message throughout the community. They knew that change wouldn't happen overnight, but they were committed to the fight. When the day of their first rally arrived, Samuel stood at the front of the crowd, a sea of faces looking back at him, faces filled with determination and hope. He felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, but he also felt the strength of the community behind him. Today we stand together, Samuel began, his voice ringing out over the crowd. Today we make our voices heard. We are not just here to speak, we are here to demand respect and dignity for everyone, regardless of race, gender, or background. Together, we are stronger than any bully. Cheers erupted from the crowd, a powerful affirmation of their shared commitment to change. Samuel smiled, knowing that they were just beginning to scratch the surface of what they could accomplish together. The rally had drawn a crowd larger than Samuel had anticipated. People filled the park, their faces illuminated by a sense of hope and determination. As Samuel stood in front of the microphone, he felt the collective energy of the crowd surging around him, a palpable force that was ready to challenge the status quo. "Thank you all for being here today," Samuel began, his voice steady and strong. "Today isn't just about standing against one man. It's about standing up for all of us. It's about recognizing our worth and demanding the respect we deserve. Together, we can create a community where everyone's voice matters, where we can thrive in our diversity." Cheers erupted, and Samuel felt a swell of pride. The faces in the crowd were a tapestry of backgrounds and experiences, all united in a common cause. He could see Lisa, Harold, Aisha, and others from the community center, their expressions filled with determination. "We've all faced challenges," Samuel continued, his heart racing with passion. "But we cannot let fear dictate our actions. We cannot allow bullies like Douglas to define our worth. Each of us has a story, and every story matters. Together we can inspire change and create a better future for ourselves and our children." As he spoke, he felt the weight of the moment. This was not just a rally, it was a turning point. The crowd listened intently, nodding in agreement, their eyes reflecting the hope that had been ignited within them. "Change doesn't happen overnight," Samuel acknowledged, "but every journey begins with a single step. We are taking that step today. Let's commit to standing together, to supporting one another, and to fighting for a society where respect and dignity are the norm, not the exception." The crowd erupted in applause, and Samuel felt the energy around him pulsate with enthusiasm. Aisha stepped forward, her voice carrying over the cheers. "I want to share my story with everyone here," she called out. "I want you all to know that you're not alone. We're all here together, and together we're stronger." As Aisha spoke, more voices joined in. One by one, people began to share their experiences, stories of discrimination, resilience, and triumph. The air was thick with emotion, the power of their collective narratives resonating throughout the park. Each story added another layer to the movement they were building together. Samuel watched in awe as the crowd rallied around each speaker, offering support and encouragement. This was what he had envisioned, a community united, where everyone felt empowered to share their truth. The energy was infectious, and Samuel felt a renewed sense of purpose. As the rally continued, Samuel took the opportunity to invite local leaders and advocates to speak. They shared their insights, strategies, and ways to get involved in ongoing initiatives that promoted equality and justice. The crowd listened with rapt attention, eager to learn and contribute. "Let's not forget," Samuel said, returning to the microphone, "that our fight doesn't end here today. We need to take this energy and channel it into action. Let's organize workshops, community cleanup days, and discussions on how we can support one another. Together, we can create a ripple effect that reaches beyond this park." The crowd erupted in cheers, and Samuel felt the sense of unity swell around him. This was just the beginning. They were not merely participants in a rally. They were a movement, ready to make their voices heard and create lasting change in their community. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park, Samuel addressed the crowd one last time. "Thank you all for being here today. Your voices matter, and together we will make a difference. Let's carry this momentum forward and continue to support one another in our fight for respect, dignity, and equality." The rally concluded with a powerful chant echoing through the park. "Respect, dignity, equality." The sound reverberated in Samuel's heart as he looked around at the faces of those who had come together, united for a cause greater than themselves. In the weeks that followed, the energy from the rally propelled Samuel and the group into action. They organized follow-up meetings, workshops, and community events that focused on building awareness about social justice issues. Samuel felt invigorated, knowing that they were making a tangible impact in their community. As he tended to the gardens he had nurtured for years, he reflected on how far he had come. The garden had always been his sanctuary, a place where he found peace and purpose. But now it was also a symbol of resilience, a reminder that beauty could flourish even in adversity. One evening, as he pruned the roses, he felt a presence behind him. Turning around, he found Lisa standing there, a smile on her face. "I just wanted to thank you, Samuel," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "You've inspired so many people, including me. You've shown us what it means to stand up for ourselves." Samuel smiled back, feeling a sense of fulfillment. "It's not just about me, Lisa. It's about all of us. We're building something beautiful together." "I know," she replied, her eyes shining, "and I can't wait to see what more we can accomplish. We're just getting started." As the seasons changed, so did the community around Samuel. The voices that had once been silenced began to rise, and the conversations about respect and equality continued to flourish. Samuel felt a sense of hope for the future, knowing they were on the right path. One day, as he walked to the community center for another meeting, he noticed a group of children playing in the park. They were laughing and running, their joy infectious. Samuel paused, watching them, and felt a swell of gratitude. They were the future, innocent, untainted by the prejudices of the past. "Hey, Mr. Samuel," one of the children called, waving excitedly. "Look at what we made." Samuel approached, curious. The children had crafted a colorful banner that read, "Respect everyone." It was a simple message, but it resonated deeply with him. "Can I join you?" he asked, kneeling down to their level. "Of course, wish us," the children chorused, their faces lighting up with excitement. As they painted together, Samuel felt a sense of fulfillment wash over him. This was what he had fought for, the ability to create a world where every child could grow up knowing their worth, where respect and dignity were not merely spoken about, but lived out every day. The community continued to grow stronger, with more people joining the movement and advocating for change. Samuel watched as friendships blossomed, healing took place, and barriers began to crumble. The garden he had tended for so long mirrored the transformation happening in the community: resilience, beauty, and growth. As the final days of summer approached, the group planned a celebration to honor the progress they had made. They organized a picnic in the park, inviting everyone to join. Samuel took a moment to reflect on how far they had come since that fateful night at Douglas's party. Standing in front of the crowd once again, he felt a surge of pride. "Today we celebrate not just the progress we've made, but the strength of our community," he said, his voice steady. "Together, we have proven that our voices matter. We have shown that we will not be silenced by bullies or prejudice. We are here to uplift one another and create a better future." The crowd erupted in cheers, and Samuel felt the warmth of their support envelop him. They were not just a group of individuals, they were a family, united by their shared experiences and aspirations. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Samuel looked around at the faces of those gathered. He felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey they had taken together. They had faced adversity, but they had emerged stronger, ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. In that moment, Samuel knew that the seeds they had planted would continue to flourish. Together, they would build a community rooted in respect, dignity, and equality, a legacy for future generations. And as the laughter and joy filled the air, Samuel felt a deep sense of peace. He had found his voice, and in doing so, had helped others find theirs. The journey was far from over, but they were ready to embrace it together. You've made it to the end. If you enjoyed this story, I am confident that you'll love the next one appearing on the screen now. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and please give this video a like. I'll see you in the next one.